Open our Bibles this morning, if you will, to the book of Proverbs. Book of Proverbs. Chapter 18. I'm only going to read one verse for right now. Proverbs 18, verse 22. Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Last night, my wife and I had the privilege of being with the Winton Place Baptist Church over in Cincinnati. They had their first annual Valentine party, and there was only couples were allowed to come. Just strictly couples only. And they asked me to bring a message dealing with Valentine's and marriage and love and all of those other things that are involved in it. And I made the comment that my wife and I, come June, we will be married 52 years. Now, just out of curiosity, I took a quick survey last night, and nobody even came close to 50 years. We were the old couple there. But I realized that whether you've been married 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, or 60 years, marriage is work. When people find out that we've been married for almost 52 years, I get asked a lot, and I mean I get asked a lot, what is the secret to a long marriage? Well, being a smart aleck, the secret to a long marriage is to stay married till death do us part. You can't be married 50, 60, 70 years if you divorce every 4 or 5 years. And so, what's the secret? Well, the secret is to stay married until death do us part. But in thinking of this, and I actually began preparing a couple of weeks ago when he called me, it really doesn't matter how long you've been married. What kind of marriage do you have? And that's what I want to focus on. When people ask me, it depends on my mood. If I'm in a silly mood and the ladies love it, I will tell them the secret to marriage is, yes, ma'am, you're right, I'm sorry. The ladies love me. I've been invited to people's homes more. That's like, you got to come to my house and tell my husband that. But on a more serious note, and I came up with this years ago, on a more serious note, I found there were 3 C's that I will deal with. And then last week at the prayer breakfast, one of the preachers gave me a 4th C that fit right in with my 3 C's. And that's what I want to look at, Lord willing, this morning. Somebody said, well, my husband's been dead or my wife, they've been dead for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. I don't plan to get married again. What good is the message to me? And the answer is really very simple. Even though you may not plan on getting married, you know somebody that is. You know somebody in your circle of friends, in your family, you know somebody that will get married, and hopefully you can pass this advice on to them. God intended marriage to be wonderful. He intended marriage to be not just stuck together for these years, but he intended marriage like the Christian life. I preached the other day on, the more abundant life. As a Christian, marriage should be as wonderful as God intended it, and as wonderful as the Bible can lead us and make us have in our lifetime. If anybody ought to have an abundant marriage, or as Proverbs said, whoso findeth a wife findeth a pain in the neck. That's not what Solomon said. Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing. Now there are stipulations, assuming you marry in the Lord, and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Many people are married, but I wonder how many, if they were totally honest, how many would say, totally honest, that we have a wonderful marriage? We have a good marriage. Well, what are the 4 C's? And I'll give them to you so you'll know when I'm, getting close to the end. The first C, and we'll look at this in detail, Christ must be the center. Number 2, there must be commitment. Number 3, there must be, and I will spend more time on this one than probably the other 3, there must be conversation. And then last of all, there must be I cut out number 4. There must be Christ. There must be commitment. There must be conversation. And then obviously the 4th one must not have been important because I didn't copy it over. So we'll try to figure that one out as we go along. Christ, commitment, conversation, and compromise. There it is, compromise. We will look at each of those 4, Lord willing. First of all, let's start at the beginning of a good marriage. I don't mean mediocre. I don't mean we tolerate each other. I don't mean we literally just put up with each other. I mean a good marriage. And those of you that are single, listen, this is the kind of guy you want to marry. Christ must. There's no ifs, no ands, no exceptions, no buts, no should be, could be, wanna be, maybe, might. Christ must be the center of that person's life. And if Christ is the center of each of their lives, then he must be the center of the home. You that are single, oh, I found Mr. Perfect. How faithful is he to church? has he been saved and demonstrated fruit of salvation? How faithful is he to serve Christ? Does Christ really have first place? Or is Christ just something he does when he has to? Those of you that are single, is Christ the head of his life? Is Christ the head of my life? Marriage is tough at its best. Marriage is work at its best. And if you don't have Christ as the center, it's only going to be worse. Is Christ the head of his or her life? One of the ways you can frequently tell is how often they attend church. Now, I know men, and I've talked to some of them, they will come up with every excuse in the world. They will volunteer for overtime. They will volunteer for special things because they don't want to have to go home. I've talked to men like that. Well, if Christ is not the head of his life or her life, before you get married, it probably won't be after you get married. Christ should be the center of every decision. Is this decision going to honor Christ or not? Jesus said in Luke 11, a house divided against a house falleth. And when you've got one person that is striving to serve God, wanting to serve God, and another one that doesn't, which one do you think is going to carry the greater influence on the other? 99 times out of 98, the one that is unfaithful will drag the faithful one down. It can work the other way, but it very seldom ever does. Jesus said in Matthew 6, seek ye first the kingdom of God. That means first before anything and everything. My decisions should rest on, am I putting God first, or am I putting God second, third, fourth, or fifth? Secondly, commitment. Now, in some of my stories you've all have heard, so I won't repeat them. But when we got married, among other things, we said, till death do us part. In other words, we said, in sickness and in health and, in poverty and wealth, and we had a whole long list of things. But the one that really stood out was we will stay together until death takes one of us. We're stuck with each other. We're married. We're committed. Divorce is not an option for us. Now, I know sometimes divorce happens and it's beyond your control, you don't really have a say in it. I think there are exceptions when divorce is permitted by God. But divorce in many cases has become a simple, I don't want to deal with problems, we'll divorce. Divorce, I understand. Sometimes it's beyond your control. But that ought to be the exception among Christians. When we got married, well, yeah. When we got married, I was a spoiled, rotten brat. I really was. I wasn't the sweet, lovable, adorable me that I am now. I was a spoiled, mom spoiled me. In 1960, I was hit by a car, spent 30 days in the hospital, 3 months in a body cast, from here down to my toe, down to my knee with the bar between to keep my leg lined up. 3 months I was in a body cast. 2 years later, I had spinal meningitis. 2 years after that, I had double pneumonia. Meningitis and pneumonia both can be fatal. So because I was always sick, Mom waited on me hand and foot. Mom, I sure would like some popcorn while I'm watching TV. Mom would get up, go to the kitchen, fix me popcorn, and bring it to me. Oh, I sure would like a glass of milk. Boom. Mom would go get my milk, and all I had to do was sit there and enjoy. And I'll never forget the first time after we were married, I said, honey, I really would like some popcorn. And this is almost a verbatim quote, almost. If you want popcorn, get up and fix it yourself. Ooh. Then things got worse and worse. And one day she gave me an ultimatum. Well, not an ultimatum. That actually came later on. But she said, let's get one thing straight right now. I'm your wife. I am not your mother. And it's like, how can you say that? Well, I've changed, or I should say God changed me. She was raised to be very independent and very stubborn. Her dad was very stubborn, and she inherited her dad's genes. So I got a stubborn independent with a spoiled, rotten brat, and you can only imagine we clashed. We clashed. Any marriage, think about it. You got two independent people. You got one that is used to going and doing what they want to. They spend what they want to, and it doesn't matter which is which. You know, if they want to go somewhere, they get in the car, they go. You've got another one that's the same way. They're not used to having to consult anyone. They're not used to having to discuss things. And so you got two people that are individuals, and now you got to try to make one out of them. any marriage is going to have, when you try to make one out of two, there's going to be some conflict. That's why divorce has to be off the table. It cannot be an option for two people who claim to be saved, claim to love the Lord, claim to serve the Lord. By the way, did you ever wonder why Jesus gave Matthew 18? If you don't know what Matthew 18 is, if a brother have aught against thee, go to him, try to work it out, try to talk it out. If that doesn't work, take some others with you as witnesses and as counselors and try to work it out. I think that same principle applies in marriage, which will bring me to my third point in a minute here. I said, didn't you ever, those first few years, didn't you ever, we fought worse than you can imagine. Didn't you ever think about divorce? And I can truthfully say, and we've talked about it since, divorce wasn't an option. We didn't think about divorce because we took divorce off when we said, till death do us part. We said divorce is not an option. Now, some of you have heard me say, murder-suicide came up a few times. But divorce was not an option. And finally, I went one day and I said, we are stuck with each other. Let's see if we can't make something work. And we both began to change. And I found the more I changed for the better, the more she changed. I was waiting for her to change, and when she changes, I'll change. But biblically, it was the other way around. I had to change. And then as I began to change, she began to change. And the last 2 or 3 years have been really wonderful. No, I'm joking about that. Number 3, in marriage, and this is true in church, this is true among friends, this is true among people, especially marriage, there must be conversation. There's a difference between conversation and simple communication. Conversation is actually listening to the other person. I remember my wife asked me on the way home last night. She had forgotten this couple. The first church I pastored, we had a couple in church. They were an older couple. He was, I don't know how rich he was, but he was very wealthy. They had everything you could hope for. She could say, I would really like a new car. Boom, next day he's out, bought her a brand new Buick, I forget what kind it was, bought her a brand new car. She said, I think a diamond ring would really look nice. Boom, he went out and bought the biggest diamond ring he could get. That same lady sat in my office many times. weeping, crying. You would think if anybody was happy, she would be happy. All she had to do was say, you know, I think I would like, boom, she's got it. Wouldn't you like to have a guy buy you everything you would like? Yeah. That lady sat in my office many times, weeping and crying. She said, he will buy me anything and everything I can possibly want. But he doesn't understand that what I really want is him. I would like to talk to him. I would like to have, and I'm using my words now, I would like to have conversation with him. He thought he was a great husband because he bought her anything she wanted, when what she really wanted was him. To just talk to him. Conversation. A common complaint that I hear more from women than men is, my husband just doesn't listen when I talk. My wife is going, let me give you a real quick test. This is for everybody, but since it's mostly I hear it from women, when your wife is talking, what are you thinking? She's talking, and you're thinking about that next buck you're going to get. Or doe, which is it? Buck, doe. Either, okay. She's talking, and you're thinking about, I wish she would shut up. She is taking my work time away. She's taking my golf time. She's taking my, whatever. Or you're thinking about, okay, she's talking. I'm planning my rebuttal before, and I hear it from ladies, my husband doesn't listen. We don't talk to each other. And I don't mean, what time's supper? Are you ever going to do the dishes? Floor's a mess. That's not conversation. Do you know animals can communicate? I read an article, and it's an excellent article. Actually, it was several articles in the Answers magazine that came out this quarter. And it went in how that animals can communicate. They can warn the other animals of danger. A beaver will flap its tail on the water to let the other beavers know there's danger approaching. Ants can communicate and say, hey, I just found a great big stash of food, and here's where it is. Let's go get it. They can communicate. Dogs can alert you that, hey, somebody's breaking in. Dogs can warn you that the house is on fire. They can communicate. But they can't carry on a conversation. I used the example. They had a missionary last night who spent 18 years in Peru. And as it turns out, they sat across from us at the table. And it's in fact, he finally moved back to the States permanently. Several reasons, but they're back in the States now. He is seeking God's leadership, what to do. But I use the illustration. He speaks Spanish probably as good or better than he speaks English. And I said, okay, Brother Reinhardt, you speak fluent Spanish. Suppose I spoke Chinese. Now, we could make signs. I'm hungry. We could make signs. Oh, got a headache. We can communicate, but we can't carry on a conversation because we're speaking two different languages. Humans are the only created thing that can actually carry on a conversation. Did you ever see two dogs sitting discussing politics? Well, what do you think about the president, Mr. Greyhound? Well, I don't know, Mrs. Pup, but dogs can't carry on a conversation. They communicate danger, food, fire, but only humans have the ability to carry on a conversation. Now, in communicating, which, by the way, that's what happened at the Tower of Babel. God confounded the language so that all of a sudden we're building this building and without knowing the difference, I say, hey, would you hand me another brick? But because we're talking two different languages, you think I asked for a cup of milk. Can you imagine building like that? In marriage, and I was amazed at the men last night that didn't know this. In marriage, there are two different languages. Oh no, we both speak English. There's female language and there's male language. Now, I gave a couple of illustrations. The husband asked the wife, honey, what's wrong? Nothing. The husband says, okay, nothing's wrong. He goes about his business. When nothing actually meant, in female language, nothing actually meant something. Females, nothing means something. To the man language, nothing means nothing. What's wrong? Nothing. Okay. So then he goes back, honey, what's really wrong? Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. It's like, I don't have ESP. I can't read your mind. If there's something wrong, tell me. But one's speaking male English, the other is speaking female English. And because most men don't understand that she's talking a different language. And so there's no real communication. There's no real conversation. In a good marriage, the wife has to be honest and open and converse. Honey, what's wrong? In a better marriage, honey, what's wrong? You really upset me last night. What did I say? Saying nothing is never going to solve the problem. There must be honest, open conversation. Honey, I didn't appreciate what you said about me from the pulpit. Boy, I get that one a lot. Ladies, you must be honest and open, because without conversation, your marriage is only going to drift farther and farther and farther apart. I'm a firm believer that in conversation, men and women, when was the last time you actually told your spouse without wanting anything in return? When was the last time you told your spouse, I love you, and I am so thankful God brought you to me? I had a member one time, he was dead serious. He made the statement, and he stood by it. The more we questioned him, the more he dug his heels in. He said, I told her the day we got married I loved her, and if it ever changed, I would tell her. I don't need to tell her I love her, because I told her on our wedding day, and it hasn't changed. Why do I have to repeat it over and over? Well, if you have to ask, you're already in trouble. I'm a firm believer, and I try my best to do it. I try to tell my wife at least once a day, at least, I love you. What's so big, what's so important about that? It's an expression of, now if you say, I love you, get out of my way. No. They need to know. Husbands maybe not as much, but we still like to hear it. I want you to know I love you. I love you. Then you not only tell her, you show her. And it isn't necessarily sending flowers on Valentine's. It's every day doing little things that shows I love you. I'm here to help. Then there must be compromise. I don't get everything I want in marriage. I used the illustration last night. I like Chinese. I like Chinese. My wife hates Chinese. But sometimes, because she loves me, she will go with me to Chinese because she knows I like it, even though she doesn't. Same thing in reverse. There are things that if I had my brothers, I'd never do some of those things. But because I love her, I do them out of love to her. Not because I want to, but I'm willing to compromise. Now, when it comes to doctrine, there is no compromise. But when it comes, and by the way, communication, conversation is also would solve a lot of problems in church. You go up, good morning. What's wrong? Nothing. And sometimes we men do that. In church, what is it? A house divided will fall. A church divided will fall. That's why Jesus gave Matthew 18. If I offend you, I may not even know that I offended you. So you come and say, hey, I really was offended by you closing the door in my face. I am terribly sorry. I didn't realize. Many problems in church and in home could be solved if people would just learn to talk to each other. But there must be compromise. I've used the illustration, me Tarzan, you Jane. Some of you remembered the old original Tarzan. All right, a couple of you are older. Sometimes, if we're not careful, we think of our spouse as Tarzan and Jane. I want my way. I'm going to get what I want. I couldn't care less what you want. Sometimes you have to compromise. Do you want a marriage, or do you want the kind of marriage that God intended for you to have? You choose every day if you're married. And those of you that aren't and hope to be, you will have to choose every day. What is it one man told me? You can be happy or you can be right, but you can't be both. One of the men came up last night, and I thought it was humorous. He said, okay, all right, you mentioned male language, female language. He said a friend of his told him the other day that when a lady says yes, she really means no, unless she really means yes. He said, so what am I supposed to do? No really means yes, unless it means no. He said, how am I supposed to know? And I said, that's where conversation comes in. Did you mean yes as in yes, or are you just saying yes to get along? Conversation, compromise. I did whatever I wanted when I was single. But once I got married, I gave up a certain amount of independence. And now it's not about me. It's about us.